What's up, Silas here, and this is just audible information in audible form. This is just a series, some things that I want to read myself. So I figure, hey, this is something else somebody else might want to actually read, so might as well read it out loud. So I'm going to read this, and this is from Common Sense, Hollywood's New Rules. This, I think, is a Substack by Barry Weiss. I've written some articles about Barry Weiss before. It was primarily when she left the New York Times, and she was talking about how there's been a change in the actual back environment of what they're going to report on, what you can see at work. This is the work environment and work culture, and she left, and she had a letter just talking about the issues that are in there, mostly with these kind of woke issues, these kind of regressive, these kind of going up to social justice type of issues, instead of focusing on what the newspaper was ostensibly for, and that is reporting on actual accurate information that is outside and then just putting that in there. It got more into like opinionated stuff, but you can check that out to get more about Barry Weiss. I think this is her group that she started on Substack, which is now a different location where you can get information, and that's the great thing about this current year that we live in. We live in a time when there's more access to information than has ever existed in human history. But I think one of the issues is we are living kind of decades behind the access to information that we actually have. There's many times when we can actually find things out, and then we ask a question, or we just have that question in our mind and we don't actually go and answer it. And for me, this is one of the things that I think, like, hey, if I have a question and I'm online, I'll normally look it up just to get that mind space out, get that out of my head and move on to other things. So this is something with Hollywood's New Rules. I initially found this out from our boy Zach over at Comics Matter. He was talking about this with Hollywood, and it was from a Daily Mail article that essentially just copied this 100% from this. I might have added they added pictures and some links and things like that on the Daily Mail article. But our boy Zach pointed out how this is something that a lot of channels are going to be covering, and I think they will be covering it. So you see a lot of people talking about this. You'll see other people talking, not a lot, I don't know, it depends on who you listen to, but you'll see other people talking about this. I wanted to actually just read the actual article itself, so I'll just get into reading that. I might give some commentary during it, but I'll probably just try to read it straight through. I think there's also part of the thing where for most of history, we've been creatures that kind of take stories in audio form. I prefer audiobooks and actual reading things, but I think there's also just a benefit of having these things out. And there's a lot of channels that just read things out, and this is what that's going to be. If I don't give commentary during it, probably some phrases here and there, I'll give some commentary after. Okay, so here we go. Common sense. This is Hollywood's New Rules. The old boys club is dead, but a new one with its own litmus test and landmines is rapidly replacing it. This is all going to end in a giant class action lawsuit. This is by Peter Kiefer? Is that Kiefer Sutherland? Yeah, Kiefer Sutherland. Peter Kiefer and Peter Savodnik. I don't know if it is just the K doesn't have the Nick sound, because Nick is like, when you say Nick, it's like N-I-C-K. It's like Nick. So Nick, is it a different thing? Okay, whatever. But you can check it out. There'll be links below for you to check it out. Hollywood Land. I don't know whether there was a land there before. I've done a few of these covers where you do like a different thing where I add like there's something that I will read out later about like Harry Lake or something. I'm just thinking about a different type of thing to talk about, how if it was like a entirely separate all female ran Hollywood type of thing, would they still be issues with there that they say have in this one? So, but anyway, so just getting into the reading now. A few years ago, the editor-in-chief of the Hollywood Reporter pitched a story to the newsroom. He had just come back from lunch with a well-known agent who had suggested the paper take a look at the unintended consequences of Hollywood's efforts to diversify. Those white men who had spent decades writing scripts, which had been turned into blockbuster movies and hit television shows, were no longer getting hired. The newsroom blew up. The reporters, especially the younger ones, mocked the idea that white men were on the outs. The editor-in-chief, normally self-assured, immediately backtracked. He looked rattled. It was a missed opportunity. The story wasn't just about white guys not getting jobs, nor was it really about the economics of Hollywood. It was about the stories Hollywood told and distributed and streamed on screens around the globe every day. It was about this massively lucrative industry that had been birthed by outsiders and emerged out of lemon groves into a glamorous, glitzy mosh pit teeming with chutzpah, I think it's supposed to be the role, chutzpah, and broken hearts, and unbelievable success stories that had made the American dream a real pulsating thing for Americans and billions of people who thought that if you could imagine something, anything, you could will it into being. It was a story about who we aspired to be. After the meeting, a reporter approached another editor about pursuing it. The editor told the reporter to drop it. No one, he said, at the Hollywood Reporter, one of a handful of trade publications that covers the ins and outs of the entertainment industry, was going to risk blowing up their career over this. The, quote, explosion of woke, end quote, as one longtime producer put it, didn't come out of nowhere. Hollywood had always pushed boundaries, from 1947's Gentleman's Agreement, which confronted anti-Semitism, to Guess Who's Coming to Dinner in 1967, which tackled interracial marriage, to All in the Family from 1971 to 1979, which grappled with race and women's liberation. The original run of Will and Grace, 1998 to 2006, did more to advance the cause of gay marriage than anything else pre-Obergefell. Obergefell. I don't know. That's Obergefell. That's not English. Okay. And then there were the villains. The vast majority of, from the Terminator to Hannibal Lecter to Gordon Gekko, were uber white, an Austrian robot, a Lithuanian waspy pinstriped capitalist. For the insiders list, see this from the Hollywood Reporter. I guess maybe a list of different people that have different things and the thingamajiggies, and like check that out and jump over there and double check. This is what I guess we can do with some of these things. Yeah, so Hollywood's favorite villains. This is something like different villains. You can check that out to see the different thing. And we have Agent Smith, Wile E. Coyote, Scar, Tony Montana. Let's resize it so we can get to a point where you can see some of these things. Maybe I don't know. Yeah, so just did a resizing of the screen here so you can kind of see these. So these are just the different things that he's showing, the different villains. Tony Montana, I guess, Al Pacino. This is just something they're pointing out to some of the villains. Not all these villains, there's Robots in here. Voldemort is like, not, this is, I don't know. It was Ray Fiennes there who played him. Here we go. So we just have some different villains in here. And this is one thing that I've spoken about. I have spoken about before, where I just said, like, when you have this kind of inclusion of type of things, one thing that's going to happen is eventually you're going to get to a situation where they're including certain people who you say are underrepresented, also in bad characters, in characters that are generally negative. But then they want to say in certain sections, oh, you can't have a woman be this evil person, or you're saying women are evil, or you can't say Arabs are evil, or you can't say Chinese people are this. So there's that kind of thing where once you start representing certain underrepresented people, they'll also be represented across the board into venues and areas that were normally reserved for certain kinds of people that were okay to consider to be villainous in that sense. I don't know. Let's see what they say for number one here. Hannibal Lecter. Darth Vader. You know, with Darth Vader, do you associate him more to like his voice actor, which was James Earl Jones, the late James Earl Jones to begin with, or do you associate him more with more like Hayden Christensen, or I forget the name of the kid who played him in the prequel series. But yeah, I guess this is just a list of the. And I know I was talking about, am I going to actually give the quotes and things like this? Well, I mean, all right, I'll try to stick to just reading. Okay, so. But it wasn't until 2015 when the when the hashtag Oscars So White controversy engulfed the 87th Academy Awards that studio chiefs and producers really started to rethink how they did business. This gained momentum in 2016 and even more in late 2017 with the Me Too. Oscars So White actually started before Me Too. A lot of things have been happening with in recent history, so I don't know. Yeah, I for some reason I would have thought Oscars So White came after. I don't know. Okay, then came George Floyd, and in the summer of 2020, everything that had been happening in slow motion started to happen much faster. The Academy of Motion Pictures and Sciences. Motion Pictures Arts and Sciences. Why are sciences included in this? The Academy of Motion Pictures Arts and Sciences. So maybe the sciences parts that work with motion pictures. So it's the Academy of Motion Pictures, Arts and Sciences. So the arts that are involved in making motion pictures and also the sciences. There's a lot of scientific advancements done in the technology used to actually film some of these things, or the makeup type of things. Or I think there's a lot of things that goes research into actually doing some of these. So maybe that's what they mean. Like if you're actually writing a really good script and you research the stuff. I don't know why sciences is in there. Let me know if you know. I might look it up after. So the industry's central nervous system had been founded in 1927. Now it had 8,469 voting members. It had tried over the years, and especially since Donald Trump's election, to catch up with the zeitgeist, inviting into its ranks a record number of new members who were black, Latino, women, or foreign born. Who were black, Latino, women, or foreign born. And again, this is why I'm saying black, I think, is specifically a group in the United States of America with mostly ADOS, American descendants of slaves, because technically, I guess you can be Latino. Like Latino is Latino just south of the border in America, because there's also people who are Latin American descendants of slaves. Would they count in black, or is that just box ticking in different kind of arenas? Okay, but that wasn't going to cut it any longer. Then here you have a picture of Gregory Peck as Phil Green in The Gentleman's Agreement from 1947. I don't know if I've watched this movie. So in September 2020, the Academy launched its Representation and Inclusion Standards Entry Platform, or RAISE, for a movie to qualify for Best Picture. Producers not only had to register detailed personal information about everyone involved in the making of the movie, but the movie had to meet two of the Academy's 4 diversity standards, touching on everything from on-screen representation to creative leadership. An Academy spokesperson said only select staff would have access to data collected on that platform. How often do we know about this? Yes, that data might be collected. Could it leak and things like this? I'm just not a fan of anything that's selected out of happenstance. When you go back here and you think of somebody who is black, Latino, women, or foreign born, these are all just happenstances. You don't choose where you're born. You don't choose your gender. Maybe current timeline, you can choose your gender. You don't choose Latino, your ethnic background. You don't choose your genetics in this kind of sense. So I personally find it a bit, if you're listening to me because you're like, oh, this is a black person making this channel, it's still welcome. I'm glad you're here, but not so much. I'd rather you be like, oh, this is an interesting thing and this person seems to be making some kind of sense. I'd prefer those. So let's just see here. Let's just do a standard. So you can check this out. Again, there's links in here. Let's just do an overview of what the standards are. So standard on-screen representation, themes, and narratives. So A1, a lead or significant supporting actors, has to be at least one of the lead actors or significant supporting actors from an underrepresented racial or ethnic group. So Asian, Hispanic, Latinx. Hey, I'm one is Latinx. I am Latinx. Black, African American. So this is to make the difference with it because Elon Musk is a African American. Charlize Theron is an African American, but they're not black. Indigenous, Native American, Alaskan Native. Middle Eastern, North African. North Africans are African Americans, but they seem to be in a different category than African Americans, which are together with blacks. So, Native Hawaiian or other Pacific Islander, and then other underrepresented underrepresented race or ethnicity. A2, general ensemble cast, and that's at least 30% of actors in secondary more minor roles are from at least 2 of the following underrepresented groups: women, racial or ethnic group, LGBTQ+, people with cognitive or physical disabilities who are deaf or hard of hearing. Recently, I think a movie like Eternals hit a lot of these things, but then it just didn't really do that well. People didn't really like it. I think it was a bit of sacrificing story for ticking. I don't know the Eternals characters in the actual book, and I think maybe some of them were close, but the movie just seemed kind of blah. Maybe I'm just tired of the stories, but of the whole Marvel universe. But that's neither here nor there. I did watch Spider-Man. Okay, so A3, main storyline and subject matter. The main storylines, themes, or narrative of the film is centered on an underrepresented groups, so women, racial or ethnic groups, LGBTQ+, people with cognitive or physical disabilities who are deaf or hard of hearing. Now, motion pictures. So this is Oscar eligibility, Best Picture category. Now, I guess this doesn't really apply because there's a separate one for international films. Because let's say there's a movie coming from... No, I guess if it's a movie coming from like, say, the Asian market... If it's coming from Bollywood, I don't know if Bollywood doesn't really achieve, but if it's coming from an international market, there's an international category of it. But let's say it's a movie coming from an Asian studio. Let's say it's like Parasite. Since Parasite is already including Asian people, a majority, that's considered a minority in the United States of America, where it's being judged, even if it's not a minority in where it's being filmed. So I think that's kind of how they think about these things. So it doesn't really apply where they have to say like, okay, if you are making Parasite in South Korea, sorry, which is what 90% South Korean, different South Korean ethnic groups, you don't have to have a representation of a few of the black of the Negro people of African descent. You don't have to have a few of the people of European descent that are Korean citizens in your film for it to qualify because we're using something. But then if you look at using global minority, you can't use global minorities. White people are the global minorities and Asians are the global majority. So that's the kind of things that you kind of think of. So standard B, creative leadership and project team. So this is just the creative leadership. So in back there, talking about the people in the back have to be these different groups. So at least two of the following creative leadership positions: casting director, cinematographer, composer, costume designer, director, editor, hairstylist, makeup artist, producer, production designer, set decorator, sound, VFX supervisor, writer are the following underrepresented groups. So other key roles have to be in there. So technical positions, including production assistant from the underrepresented racial and ethnic groups. These positions include but not limited to first AD, gaffer, script supervisor, etc. Standard C, industry access and opportunities. To achieve Standard C, the film must meet both the criteria before, so paid apprenticeship and internship opportunities for different people in these groups. So major studios and distributors are required to have substantive ongoing paid apprenticeship internships inclusive of underrepresented groups, must also include racial and ethnic groups. In most of the following departments: production, development, physical production, post-production, music, VFX acquisitions, business affairs, distribution, marketing, and publicity. See, I don't really hold it against people taking these positions. If you need a job, if you're trying to make some money and they have these things and you get the job, I understand people getting in there. But once you get in there, I encourage you to kind of still try your best and still actually have some kind of merit on your actual ability to achieve these things. So training, opportunities, and skills development crew. So this is people who are in distribution or financing, offers training for work opportunities below the line skill development to people in the following underrepresented groups. And Standard D is audience development. To achieve Standard D, the film must meet the criterion before, and that's director representation in marketing, publicity, and distribution. So the studio and film company has multiple in-house senior executives from among the following underrepresented groups, must include individuals from the underrepresented groups. So all categories other than Best Picture will be held to their current eligibility requirements. Films in the specialty feature categories: animated feature film, documentary feature, international feature film, submitted for Best Picture and general entry consideration will be addressed separately. Okay, yeah, so they've made an exception for those things because some of these animation things will just be like from another country where it's entirely, essentially one ethnicity or one racial group in 95% of the production. So I think they kind of say that, but then it depends on how much is in there. So that's the rules there. And now back to the article. Okay, so the Academy explained that movies failing to meet these standards would not be barred from qualifying for Best Picture until 2024, but producers are already complying. In 2020, data from 366 productions were submitted to the platform. Meanwhile, CBS mandated that the writer's room be at least 40% Black, Indigenous, and people of color, or BIPOC, for the 2021 to 2022 broadcast season and 50% of the 2022 to 2023 season. ABC Entertainment issued a detailed series of inclusion standards, and I agree with every studio. I agree. I guarantee you, English. I guarantee you that every studio has something like that, a longtime writer and director said. Now you see here it's saying at least 40%. So if it's 90% Black, Indigenous, and people of color, it's not considered a negative thing. It achieves at least 40%. But now I wonder, will there ever be a point where they say we're going to match it to be exactly? If you are 1%, let's say if you're 2% of the population, which is Asians, people primarily of like Southeast Asian population, if you consider Indians and things like that, the Asian continent itself, Asian supercontinent or subcontinent with like the Eurasia, if you count that part, then it's about 5 to 7% of the United States population, so you limit it to just that, where you can't have anyone higher. That's where you might start getting problematic with some of these things. But I don't think it'll ever get to that point. Okay, so to help producers meet the new standards, the filmmaker Ava DuVernay, who was recently added to Forbes' list of the most powerful women in entertainment, along with Oprah Winfrey and Taylor Swift, last year created Array Crew, a database of women, people of color, and others from underrepresented groups who work on day-to-day production. Line producers, camera operators, art directors, sound mixers, and so on. The Hollywood Reporter declared that Array Crew has fundamentally changed how Hollywood productions will be staffed going forward. Sure, it's somewhat lucrative as well to do that. More than 900 productions, including Yellowstone and Mayor of Easttown, have used Array Crew, says Jeffrey Taubler, and the chief marketing officer of Array, DuVernay's production company. Privately, directors and writers voiced irritation with DuVernay, who, they said, had exploited the post-George Floyd moment. But no one dared to criticize her openly. "I'm not crazy," one screenwriter said. Of course, Hollywood, like many industries, does have a clubbiness about it. And pretty much everyone on the inside insists it should open up to those who had for decades been kept out. But the heavy-handed mandates and the databases, the shifting culture in which pretty much all white men were assumed to have gotten their jobs because they had the right tennis buddies or zip code or skin color, raised the possibility of a new kind of clubbiness. When asked whether Array Crew was just replacing one kind of exclusion with another, Taubler sidestepped the question, saying the organization sought to amplify underrepresented professionals. Now, this is quite right, like I mentioned, with the things of happenstance. Right tennis buddies. So it's not tennis buddies, maybe it's like right basketball court players, where it's like, I played in basketball court, so I'm going to be one who's like, if I'm making film about basketball, it has to be a black writer, because I remember playing basketball in the court. So that's a part of it. Zip code, that comes through, zip codes also exist outside of the United States of America. So depending on the zip code that you're born to, some areas, if you're born in like a Chinatown zip code, your chances are you're a Chinese writer, you're going to a Chinese American, or an American of Chinese ethnicity or Chinese origin writer, chances are that's a zip code that you've been into. So yeah, okay, we're going to give you that one. Skin color, as we mentioned, is a difference with like in Elon Musk or Charlize Theron than someone who's like, I think of a Trevor Noah or something like that. So he's like, okay, Trevor Noah, yes, he had some mixed background, things like that, but yeah, his skin color kind of applies for this, so we'll do that. So I think with some of these, they say, in the past, they ostensibly say, in the past, that's what people were getting for. Those white men were getting it for this, primarily white men were getting it for these things. So it's okay if we come in with these similar things for our sakes to amplify underrepresented professionals. Okay, so but the result has not just been demographic change. It has been an ideological and cultural transformation. We spoke to more than 25 writers, directors, and producers, all of whom identify as liberal, and all of whom described a pervasive fear of running afoul of the new dogma. This was the case not just among high command companies like Netflix, Amazon, and Hulu, but every level of production. How to survive the revolution? By becoming its most ardent supporters. Best way to defend yourself against the woke is to outwoke everyone, including the woke, one writer said. Suddenly, every conversation with every agent or head of content started with, "Is anyone BIPOC attached to this?" The old-timers are accustomed to being on the inside, and the non-BIPOC up-and-comers, afraid they'd never get there, were one part confused, one part angry, and 10,000 parts scared. Everyone has gone so underground with their true feelings about things, said Mike White, the writer and director behind the HBO comedy drama The White Lotus. If you voice things in a certain way, it can really have negative repercussions for you, and people can presume that you could be racist, or you could be seen as misogynist. These are things where I've mentioned you can be racial without being racist. To me, my definition of racist is just simply somebody choosing and saying this person is preferable to person X is preferable to person Y to do Z thing based on the simple genetic race of X and Y. That's it. That's just making a decision based on that. So if you say one is preferable to y, if you say x is preferable to y, that is also can be stated y is lesser than x to do z. So that's it. If you make something based off of that, that's a racist thing to say this person is preferable based on their race. This person is worse based on their race. But then saying you have a preference where someone's like, okay, someone can be like, I prefer Caribbean women. I prefer women who have the ethnicity of Rihanna over the women who have the ethnicity of like Taylor Swift. Now, is that racist to say that you, for your personal preference, would prefer to date someone who has Rihanna's ethnicity over Taylor Swift's ethnicity? I wouldn't say that is racist, even though you're saying that is somebody who is better for you to date. Are they better because of that, or if you have a preference to that? I think that is more of like a racial preference. I think that is racial, but not necessarily racist. So some of these things, they might be a racial preference to cast somebody in somewhere, but then to say like, because this person, okay, this person can't act, but just because this person is this race, that's someone we're going to pick over this other person. So there's something that kind of gets into that. And then misogynist, again, is just primarily somebody who just dislikes somebody for being a woman. Very few people, I think, very few people in the world are truly racist, and very few people in the world are truly misogynist. It's just really hard to just function as a human being in current year, current timeline, being this way in the West and things like that. It's rather difficult. Okay, so Howard Koch, who had been involved in the production of more than 60 movies, including such classics as Chinatown and Manhattan and Marathon Man, and is the former president of the Academy of Motion Pictures Arts and Sciences, said, I'm all for LGBT and Native Americans, blacks, females, whatever minorities that have been served correctly, that have not been served correctly in the making of content, whether it's television or movies or whatever, but I think it's gone too far. I know a lot of very talented people that can't get work because they're not black, Native American, female, or LGBTQ. Another writer who, like most of the writers we interviewed, was afraid to speak openly for fear of never working again, said, I get so paranoid about even phone calls. It's so scary. My close friends and my family are just like, don't say anything. It is one of those things. Will I be able to sleep at night if I say anything? Getting jobs in this town is, it's still a quote. Getting jobs in this town is so hard, and I'm very grateful to have a great job. If there's any so-called ding on my record, that would just be an argument against hiring me. And I think this is, as I said, I understand why people are just going. People gotta make that bread. It is, said Sam Wasson, the author of The Big Goodbye, Chinatown and the Last Years of Hollywood, not so different from the McCarthy era, where everyone in Hollywood professed to believe something that they thought everyone outside Hollywood, the country, their audience, believed. Hollywood was never anti-communist, Wasson said. It just pretended to be. In fact, Hollywood was never anti or pro anything. It was show business. There's no morality here. And I think here is where they can agree. You can see the relationship that they have with the Communist Party, the Chinese Communist Party. They don't give a damn. In general, it seemed to be more about making money. And I think something like this article in general, is part of what is saying, like, okay, might actually create some of the changes. And with some of these cases, even Van Sciver, who has Comic Artist Pro Secrets channel, made a point that with some of these things where people are saying, oh, it's so woke, in some cases, it's just them trying to achieve things like the ESG goals, economic, social, governance goals, where you can get certain grants and you're allowed to work in certain areas if you have this kind of... There's a lot of Hollywood accounting type of things in the background where if a film is just made, once a film is made, most of the people who invested into it have already somehow earned money from it. So this whole situation of, oh, the box office was a really big dump. Like, for most cases, like, the box office is not as big of a deal. It might be for external investors, but within the industry, there might have been people who are already profiting from those things. So it's still about profits, so it just depends on where those profits are coming from. If an international market is bringing in a lot more, how many movie theaters are there in China? In China, once you have the movie theaters pay to show the movie, how much do you actually need, like, the ticket sales? The ticket sales are normally recouping for the actual theaters. So that could have a knock-on effect eventually, but from the break, most of the people actually just make the money from actually just having the films made to begin with. Okay, so that amorality, coupled, that amorality, coupled with a finely tuned sense of what the audience is hungry for, what's trending, has left Hollywood more susceptible to the vagaries of the culture war. Nothing they, nothing they'll just say. Sorry, now they'll just say, "Sorry, diversity quotas. We're just not allowed to hire you," said a 48-year-old white male comedy writer who was recently dropped by his agent. Zach Stentz, a writer and producer who was a screenwriter on Agent Cody Banks and the Marvel movie Thor, said, "A really toxic thing that does happen is that agents will tell their clients, especially white clients, when they don't get a job, 'Oh yeah, it's just because they had to hire a minority writer,'" Stentz added. Even if that's true, it's not a helpful thing to say. I think it's helpful to get honesty. If it's the truth, it's the truth. And now here's the late Sidney Poitier. He just recently passed on, and there was something he was talking about where he was like, he was having an interview, and he was being asked different questions, and he was like, "You ask me questions about being black, like about this, he said, ask me questions about the things that I am paraphrasing. He said, ask me questions about me being an actor, me being the things he chose to do, me being a man, like the actions he's taken versus just the blackness of him. Like he didn't want that. And there's several people that have done this, like Morgan Freeman has talked about this. And I think you'll see it's kind of like the Latinx thing, where it's like if you actually talk to the people that some people think they're representing, when you actually talk to someone, they're like, I'm not really quite that. I'd rather be somebody based off of the actions that I do. And I'm in that kind of group or those people, and I appreciate seeing those. So this was Guess Who's Coming to Dinner in 1967. I think I might have seen this one. I'm not quite sure. Okay. One showrunner, afraid to send his email to us out of fear of them accidentally winding out up on the wrong screen, agreed to show us correspondence with agents, writers, and studio chiefs that capture the new thinking of the highest levels of the Hollywood food chain. Sitting in his office in a casita behind his house and next to the pool, we scrolled through the emails on his laptop. This one, a dead end. They're going to limit search to women and BIPOC candidates. How tied to hiring him are you? There's some internally that don't like the idea of hiring a white guy. I wish I had a better way to frame it. Hate this shit. So you're now telling us that this job must go to a female BIPOC writer. Sorry, it sucks. When we wrapped up, the showrunner said, "This is all going to end in a giant class action lawsuit." And that's something that the United States of America, I don't appreciate how positive that is. It's a very litigious society. And I am an anarchist in the sense where I don't like people who are not subjected to the laws that they create, but I do like laws. And having some of the lawsuits, yes, some of them are frivolous, some of them are unneeded. The system itself doesn't actually, many things get settled outside of court before they actually get to the system. And many people lack the actual justice that I think they would be able to achieve in a more just system. But they're still very litigious. And when you have this actual trail, when enough people are actually writing and saying and stating, how many people are being recorded saying, we have to hire someone like this? Eventually, I think some of these things might turn around. Okay. The creatives who embrace this agenda think all of this is laughable. A lie, a rationalization. Hi, agents and managers of white folks in the industry. The actor and director Natalie Morales tweeted in November, "For fuck's sake, please stop blaming diversity hires for why your client isn't getting the job. It's either that it's either that you're not working hard enough or that they're not good enough. Be honest with them. You are harming us." Okay. So it's like, don't say you're harming us by saying this. But we're not harming you by saying this. It's this thing that you have here. Roshi Jeffrey, a black writer on Grownish, Santa Inc. and Woke. Santa Inc. was that thing that came out with Seth Rogen and Sarah Silverman. And let me just double check if I can have this. See if it's, okay. Santa Inc. I downloaded this thing here where it's like it's a I downloaded this this thing of it's a YouTube it's a Google kind of hey, look at this, it's a Google it's a Google extension where it's a Chrome extension where you can still see the YouTube dislikes, and right now it's at 205,000 dislikes and 4.5 thousand likes. This was Santa Inc., the trailer that came out with Seth Rogen and Sarah Silverman. And now the comments are turned off. The comments that were in here were some vicious stuff talking about elves instead of the tribe. And it was some vicious stuff in there. I didn't necessarily get it when I was like, reading, why are they talking about elves? And I was like, oh, okay. And there was this came shortly before YouTube finally decided to take off the likes and dislikes. And I think this is a record. This is one of the record ones on this. And it was eviscerated by people, and I don't know how good the thing is. There's some things in there, there's different things. So this person was involved in Santa's Inc. I don't know. Okay, so he said, I don't care if white people aren't comfortable because black people are uncomfortable all the fucking time. I can't tell you how many times I've had to bite my tongue so as not to offend white sensibility. So I don't give a shit if they're nervous. Okay? Don't bite your tongue. Just say it. Why are you biting your tongue? So, yeah. The showrunner said that the new politics is making it hard to get work done. He added that human resources departments in the studios are streaming services are awash in complaints directed at white male showrunners just for doing their job. It's gotten to the point where I won't give notes on a script any longer to a woman or person of color. So when is this? So is he saying that he doesn't care? Is this the same person? So a black writer. Okay, so black writer, the showrunner. I don't know, maybe jumping around here. So when he wrapped the show, okay, so this is the showrunner. So they're talking about this person actually, my bad. Maybe I should be jumping around giving comments. So they talked about other people, then they came back to the showrunner there. So the showrunner said that new politics is not giving script, won't give notes to any script any longer to a woman or a person of color. So Sten said that he hasn't run into any problems with young millennial staffers, which with more, shall we say, of a social justice emphasis. But he added, I know other people have had less happy experiences. The writer's room is supposed to be smart, funny, nasty, and a little bawdy, the kind of place where people can make jokes and riff and wonder out loud and vomit out ideas that might become an unforgettable scene. Another showrunner in his mid-50s, white male unfortunately, said, You're not allowed to pick your staff anymore, and studios won't let you interview anybody who isn't a person of color. He added that the culture of documenting even the slightest of slights makes him anxious. I'm sitting in a room trying to run a show with a collection of people I don't totally trust. The politicization of content production, creators said, was going to be the industry's death knell. Especially in the past year, ideology has become more important than art. Quentin Tarantino said in June on Bill Maher's show, It's like ideology trumps art. Ideology trumps individual effort. Ideology trumps good. Exhibit A, woke. The comedy series, which premiered on Hulu in September 2020, should have been the statement on America right now. It's about a black cartoonist who is awakened to systemic racism after a run-in with the cops. The show started off on the right foot. The showrunner, Aisha Carr, and the writer's room she oversaw delivered a strong batch of early scripts, according to several writers on the show. The producers weighed in. The notes were all sanctimonious. One writer said, It was never supposed to be as serious as it was. We wanted a thought-provoking show that made fun of woke culture and explored notions of what a black artist's life would be like in San Francisco among white liberals. But we could only punch down at the safest targets, white men. The irony was not lost on anyone. The black writers starting with Carr, were more willing to take risks and poke fun at the anti-racist orthodoxy. I'll say with somebody of Negro genetics, according to Nairobi, Kenya, I've lived in San Francisco for a few years, back and forth, and my friend Raka was in there, and met some other people were mostly white. Some of the people I met, some of them weren't. And it was pretty good. No, it wasn't bad. Some of them were liberal. I mean, it wasn't bad, but that's my personal experience, and I'm not projecting my personal experience on everyone, but that's just some of my own personal idea of it. Beautiful city. Seriously, the location of that place, one of the most beautiful locations I've ever been to in my life, but definitely some actual socio-political issues that are going there. The last time I was there was back in 2016, so things have de-escalated relatively fast with some of the things going on. 2016, 2017, around that area. That was pre-poop app, the poop nap and things like that. There's been some things. There's been a bit of a regression, if I'd say that. Okay, so this led to creative differences, and soon Carr, a black woman, was out. She was replaced by Xander Lehman, a white man. Then Lehman was out too, replaced by Jay Dyer, who's black. Jay was brought on towards the end for optics, a black writer on the show said. Any black guy would do. That was the energy I got. Carr and Keith Knight, a co-creator of the semi-autobiographical show, declined to comment. The quality of the script suffered, and the show, which premiered in September 2020, landed a 53% green splat average audience review on Rotten Tomatoes. In late 2020, Hulu renewed Woke for a second season. It also replaced Dyer with a fourth showrunner, Anthony King, who is white. King did not reply to an email seeking comment. Kevin Parker, a black talent manager at Artists First, said the skeptics missed the point. The whole diversity thing isn't about money, Parker said. Artists First represents some of the most successful black people in Hollywood, including Jordan Peele, Tiffany Haddish, Regina Hall, Kenya Barris, the creator of Blackish, and Marshall Todd, the co-creator of Woke. Recently, the firm moved from its old digs in Beverly Hills to a bigger office in Century City. It's good business to tell stories from different perspectives, and that's all this really is, Parker said. So it's not about money. I think if you're working in a business, it normally is about money. Like if you're not really focused on how you're going to do something where the customer actually, you're serving a demand of the customer, and that exchange of worth is normally done through money. Money is a means of exchange in that sense, saying I value what you're doing, so I'm going to give you this money so you can give me more of these things that I value. That kind of thing, if you're not really focused on that so much, then chances are you're not going to be able to maintain what you're doing in that business aspect. There's charity and there's other things. There's other ways to have other interactions. Personal relationships are about different kinds of exchanges of value that are not money focused. And so in that aspect, I understand that. But when you're working in a business, show business, I think that is in part about money. I don't know. I mean, would these one question, if it's not about money, would these people work for free? Would these people not take salary? I don't think they would. I don't think they'd be like, we're just going to do this so we can give these different perspectives. They wouldn't do that. They still want some money. So it is about money to some extent. Okay, so shows like Donald Glover's award-winning Atlanta, Issa Rae's Insecure, and Michael Cole's I May Destroy You are part of this new investment. The first two episodes of Atlanta, which aired September 6, 2016, reeled in 1.6 million voters, surpassing the record for the basic cable comedy premiere, previously held by Inside Amy Schumer. Insecure just wrapped up a 5-season run. Yeah, what? Where's Insecure mentioned before first? I don't know. Insecure, Issa Rae's Insecure, so just wrapped up, so they're talking about a different show. Yeah, Donald Glover, I like Donald Glover, really like his music, and liked him on Community, which I think the first time I saw him, did not watch him in Star Wars. Really like him as Childish Gambino. His great albums, Bonfire, one of my favorite recent songs. It's not that recent, I think it was like 10 years ago. But yeah, amazing song. This very talented guy. And of course, like, This Is America, very, very, very talented guy, Donald Glover. But then with some of these people, I think it seems like if you're this successful already, there's been some good stuff. Maybe you're saying they're this successful because of the work stuff. But as we're talking about some of the diversity stuff that just started, it just started relatively recent. Someone like Oprah, one of the richest women in the world, she's black. You have people like Ellen, one of the richest women in the world, most powerful person, she's gay. Like, I mean, it's like there's these people who are there. So how did these people achieve these things before all these diversity things if it was so limited? I don't know. And if you want things from different perspectives, can't you also just go, there's movie industries, there's like Nigerwood, which is a lot of different things like Nigeria. There's, of course, Bollywood. There's these other places. So it's not like other people, other places aren't creating stories where you can get stories from there. Like with Parasite, that was really cool to see things like Parasite. I've been a fan of manga and anime for decades now, and I've been getting other stories from other perspectives. Like maybe I'm not too into Hollywood anymore, so I'm like, I don't really understand why you're making these changes because I just don't really watch your stuff that much anymore. So I might not be the target demographic, but there's other content. You can find find other content. As I mentioned, we are, as a society, if you're listening to this, chances are you're living in a society, in an area where people are living decades behind the access to the information that they have. And the access to information is not just only educative information, information for working, information for relationships, but also just like information. Entertainment is another form of information. And I think you can find other stuff. There's no more good music on the radio. There was never good music on the radio. It was always poppy stuff, popular stuff. But you can find access to many different artists making songs. Like many people probably didn't really know, like Donald Glover had music until till This Is America blew up. But I was familiar with his music for years before that already. Okay, so maybe it's 15% about the belief that it will bring more people into viewing content, and 85% about the fear of being attacked on social media or in places like the Hollywood Press or the New York Times, a writer and producer said. You've got to be insane not to have at the forefront of your mind all of these racial and gender and trans issues when you're writing something. You have to worry about the impact that everything you do will have on your career, and that has an obvious chilling effect on creativity. Now here you have Gene Wilder and Cleavon Little in The Blazing Saddles from 1974. I really do remember watching this film as a kid and just finding it hilarious. And this is before I was in the United States of America. I think I watched it when I was still in Kenya. It might have been, or I had just gone to the United States of America. It might have even been in France, but it wasn't in France. I was like below being 5. I don't know if I would remember that, but I think my dad had and it was some of the stuff I kind of didn't really understand Westerns that much. I remember watching Westerns with my dad as a kid, so there were some tropes already in that were in this that I kind of got. It's a really great film. Highly suggest that y'all check it out. I'm surprised that there hasn't actually been a redo of this. I don't know who you think would be for Gene Wilder. I'm trying to think for Gene Wilder, who would they pick now? I'm trying to think. Maybe like a Kevin's. They'd probably do like Kevin. I'm forgetting. It's not Kevin Smith. Not what's the comedian's name? I'm forgetting his name. The comedian that's often with The Rock in films. He might do like the Cleavon Little. And they could do maybe like Pete Davidson or someone could do the Gene Wilder position, and they could redo this film. I don't know. Who do you think would be recast in a more current year kind of version of this? Okay, continue the beginning. We emailed Franklin Leonard, the founder of the Blacklist. We emailed Franklin Leonard, the founder of the Blacklist. The point of which is to elevate voices that might otherwise not get elevated, to talk about the industry's marked shift, what was driving it, and where did it go next. He declined to comment. So I guess maybe he said that's what the founder of the Blacklist, that's what they said with the Blacklist, what is driving it, what are we doing next? He declined to comment, okay. So there's a feeling among those who didn't hew to the new orthodoxy that it was becoming harder not only for people to find work, but for a certain kind of content, ballsier, more provocative to get made. And this is something that's true. And some of this content, somebody else pointed out, I don't know who pointed this out. Might have been our boy Zach. Might have been you and Skyver. Was talking about things like with nudity. Yeah, I think he was even with Skyver. He was talking about with nudity and certain R-rated content. If you actually think about it, that has kind of moved off from being in the big screen. That has now gone to these HBO type of longer series. Even some of the things on like cable where there's more, especially when you come to like nudity and sex and things like that. That's like the Game of Thrones type of things. That's the kind of things with The Boys. You see that kind of ultra violence in that thing. But when you look at more like Hollywood, when you look at more the movie theater fare, that stuff has been sanitized to a certain kind of package. And I think this is something that is naturally going to happen, where you're going to have movie theaters not just have certain set things, and then I think they'll start going to things where maybe you could go to a movie theater to have like the entire place turned into like an arcade, so you have people gaming at different times. You can have a thing where certain people can vote on certain movies to make a comeback. So it's like, hey, if you want to see Blazing Saddles again, have a limited run, you have a system where people vote for some time, and they say, okay, we're going to vote for this, and then if you actually bring it back, we say you have to get to 1 million votes in order to have Blazing Saddles come back in the United States of America theaters for about a month. And then for the first 500,000, at least 500,000 of these people voting for it to come back need to actually say, put a credit card or put something to say, if it comes back, here's my money to buy a ticket. Then they'll say, okay, now it's worthwhile to actually do that, and then they'll bring it back. I think there'll be a system like that brought in soon for certain, made for movies, made for theaters, where there's things like Dune, that's a film that is made to be seen in a movie theater. Certain films I'm trying to think. Okay, Spider-Man made for, but even Spider-Man, I don't really know. It's so much. They have like the 4D movie theaters where there's like different kind of effects, like water spritzing on you, the seat moving, and things like. They might be those other things where you can go into something like that. But then rom-coms, you don't need a romantic comedy to really be in a movie theater. There's no really need to do that anymore. I think you can just do it straight to streaming and other kind of services. Okay, so back to the reading. They were scared of what's happening. The fear, one prominent director said in an email, is the audience stops trusting us. They begin to see us as a community twisting ourselves into a pretzel to make every movie as woke as possible, every relationship mixed racially, every character sexually fluid, and they decide that we are telling stories set in fantasyland instead of a world they know and live in. If that happens, and they decide to throw themselves into video games 24/7, we will lose them. I think that's one thing you have to do. As I mentioned, you have to bring in video gaming type of things where you have like movie tie-ins, game tie-ins, these type of things. And this is like a mobile game tie-in with something. But even video games has been involved with some of these kind of wokish type of things as people in different Gamergate and like Comicsgate and these kind of environments who are talking about these other fields are also been involved with these kind of woke ideology, ideation, tactics, hiring, planning, and things like that. That's there across the board. But then gaming is a lot more interactive, and I think with gaming, there's a lot more independent gaming out there that people actually take in, where you see small groups of people. Sometimes it's just one person working in a video game. Sometimes it's a few people, like me and my friends, trying to come together and start a gaming studio and a creative studio and things like this, where you can just work on one project. That's like one person. Sometimes one person working on one project goes to like a crowdfunding type of thing, and then he releases that game, and he just keeps releasing different updates. And with even a small group of 100 people supporting this person could be bringing in 10,000, like $100,000 a year, just from the people donating that, and then other people buying the game on like Steam or something like that, or some kind of thing. So you have these kind of things more independent. I see that more in gaming. Now, when you're making an entire movie, maybe it's not as straightforward. It's definitely not as straightforward. You can't just sit there with a computer. I guess you still can with animation and certain things like that. You can't just sit there and make an entire movie by yourself. And with the studio that me and my friends are trying to create, we're trying to figure out a way to kind of use the technology we have to kind of crowd create different stories, animations, ideas, games, and things like this, and the entire universe in that kind of sense. Okay, so back to the reading. Movies and shows were only widely acclaimed. Movies and shows that were once widely acclaimed are now verboten. Writers and directors said included this crazy Blazing Saddles, even though it was co-written by Richard Pryor. The Bad News Bears, even though it featured a multiracial cast. Tootsie, because transgender activists and Rocky, bad guy cannot be black. A director explained in email. Rocky, okay, Rocky because it was Carl Weathers, and then later on, a few later on, it was Mr. T. And these are the things that I'm saying. You're going to get to a point where it's going to be too stark, where you're just like, why are every single bad guy a white blonde man, like like white blonde Americanish man? Like, what's going on here? There's gonna be some notices of that, and there is an effect to this because I still think I have a general mistrust for like Russians, just like watching all like the 1980s things. Was like every villain was like a Russian. It's like it has an effect. There's some effect to it. Okay, so nor would the Wizard of Oz get greenlit. The Munchkins, forget it, the director said. Nor would All in the Family, probably the most influential show in the 1970s. Archie Bunker, the main character, is basically a Trump voter, a producer explained. South Park, which debuted in... debuted? You see, this is debuted. Is that word? Which... D-E-B-U-T-E-D. It's debuted? Or is it debuted? How do you say this word for you? Debuted? Debuted. But it's debuted. Isn't it debuted? Weird. English. So in 1997, has been grandfathered in. Otherwise, no way, another producer said. So all of which may explain the very strange story of the brand new $484 million Academy Museum of Motion Pictures. In September, the Academy threw a gala celebrating the opening of the museum. Attendees include Sophia Loren, Guillermo del Toro, Jennifer Hudson, Issa Rae, Orlando Bloom, and Katy Perry. Lady Gaga performed. Vogue covered it in the way Vogue covers things. Ted Sarandos, a co-CEO of Netflix and the chair of the museum's board, gave a speech. In what is now common practice in places like Los Angeles, an elder from the local Tongva tribe kicked things off with a blessing and a land acknowledgement. The sanitation worker, whose job it was to clean up the podium between speakers, dutifully wore his mask. The speakers did not. Yeah, it's the emperors have no clothes on. Is this the Rona Chan has really exposed things. As I mentioned, one of my first early observations about Rona Chan was this is going to be a societal Rosetta Stone where people are going to see certain things that they had certain suspicions of and compare how different people do things that was affecting all of us in pretty much the same way, but doing it in different ways, and then really being able to go back and judge and translate, like, is this really appropriate? Would you really think this is a thing to do? If you believed X, would you do Y? If you thought ABC, why are you not doing PQR? And that is something that is one of the things that is completely clear, like the Met Gala type of thing, Demsosh Bay AOC with with the tax rich, she's in there without her masks, and all these other people who are watching and watching these royalty people type of these illiterati, they're all in the masks and things like that. She's getting her dress fixed and tested out. The people who are, she's not wearing a mask, but the people who are working on her dress are wearing the mask. She goes down to Florida when New York has all these like restrictive kind of rules. You have now, there's too many of these things where I think too many of these things are happening at once. You have the current president of the United States of America talking about how, voting IDs we shouldn't have voter ID. He's speaking from Georgia saying this, but then his office is in Washington D.C., and then in Washington D.C., Mayor Mario Browser, a black woman for what that counts, she's saying for you to go around Washington D.C., you have to have proof of vaccination, you have to have your ID, you have to have, there was something else she said with those things. So those three things, I'm like, okay, so if somebody was going to vote, would they have to have all those three things as well to actually enter the location of voting? So this kind of things where it's like, kind of sus, kind of suspicious. Okay, so back to the reading. The museum features an iconic spherical 33,000 square foot theater designed by Renzo Piano, stunning exhibitions, and a two-story restaurant called Fanny's, named after Fanny Brice, the actor and comedian. But oddly, it's missing any mention of the small band of mostly Jewish emigres from Eastern Europe who created the film industry. The people without whom there would be no entertainment industry. In today's climate, in which inclusion and diversity are said to be so important, it was an especially ironic omission. The Jews were excluded from almost everywhere. Their success signaled the inclusivity and possibility that only Hollywood could afford them. The rise of the industry's founding fathers should have been an inspiring origin story around which everyone in the community could rally. The link between them then and now seems obvious. If this was really about oppressed people rising, it would seem obvious, but is it? That's a question. One of the questions. Most of the media that reported the museum missed this. Sharon Rosen-Leib, writing in the Jewish newspaper The Ford, did not. As a link here, you can go check that out. It was as if they wanted to pretend that a huge chunk of Hollywood's past hadn't been airbrushed out. More to the point, it was as if they wanted to forget that Hollywood was not the cartoon it was being made out to be, suggested Sam Wasson, the author. Hollywood at its best was meritocratic, said Wasson, who wrote about the museum for Airmail. If you don't believe me, just watch the movies of the great filmmaking eras. And then here you have Dustin Hoffman as Tootsie in 1982. Now they had this thing, with the transgender, I think he was playing a transgender, so now the transgender activists would say, you have to actually get a transgender actress or actor, depending on which side, male to female to male, to play this person. Now, when you have this kind of thing, you have to get a gay person to play a gay person. You have to get a lesbian to play a lesbian. You have to get X to play X. When these kind of things. Now, will it get to the point where they say, okay, if you're gay, you can't play a straight actor. If you're a lesbian, you can't play an actress that's cis. Will they get to that point? We'll say that transgender people can only play transgender people. They can't play the gender that they've transitioned into. Will it ever get to that point? And I don't think it will, because these people are not really so specific on that. It's more about other things in there, because that is something that you could actually get to, which is relatively unfortunate. Like, yes, You can have BBC production have Anne Boleyn be played by a black woman, while everybody else in the cast is not switched to the, to the different races. Everyone else in the cast is still like her father and mother are still played by white actors. I don't know if they were played by white actors. They changed their entire family. I haven't checked for stuff like that. But then if you go to the thing where you say, okay, we're gonna do Shaka Zulu with even if they said we're gonna do Shaka Zulu with like The Rock playing Shaka Zulu, would people be okay with that, or would you have to have somebody like I'm forgetting his name again? Would you have like let's say you had like an Idris Elba, and I had this other video I was talking about like with Black Panther. We were like, oh yeah, you have to have black actors in these ones. Like, why don't you get like African actors? Wakanda was supposed to be in Africa. Africa has movie industries, has film industries. So get African actors alone. Get like Lupita Nyong'o, who's like, okay, she actually was born in Kenya. Versus having something with like Chadwick Boseman, who played Chala, the late Chadwick Boseman. He played Chala, excellent actor. So he gets that position, but he's British. He's born in England. He's never in my history lived in. Okay, he's never actually lived in Africa. So for Shaka Zulu, would you have to get someone like maybe Francis Ngannou, who now has lived in Africa? He's I think Ghanaian or something like that, Ghanaian origin. Then he moved to France and things like that. Then he worked up. Now that's the heavyweight champion of the UFC. So would you say, okay, now we have to get something like Francis Ngannou is the only person who can play someone like a Shaka Zulu? I don't know if you really want to go down that road. So Howard Koch, who ran the academy when it greenlit the museum, said the museum's higher-ups had been made aware of their oversight. Let me say that the wrong will be righted very soon, he said. This appears to be a six-week program on Jewish Austrian emigres who fled the Nazis to make movies in Hollywood. It is important not to lose sight of the backdrop against which all of the above has happened. On this, pretty much everyone agrees. Over the past decade, the streaming services have upended old business models and imposed a new ruthlessness on an entertainment industry that was already pretty ruthless. For years, the real money in Hollywood came from the television channels that broadcast reruns and old movies. Residuals meant creatives were paid handsomely. But with the rise of Netflix, Amazon, and other streaming services, that model collapsed, and the vast majority of creatives had to make do with less. Now most people in the industry do not earn enough to support a family of 4 in Los Angeles. As money has gotten tighter, people have gotten angrier. Things have gotten uglier. I'd say that probably expedited the radicalization, a longtime Hollywood creative said of the shifting marketplace. Mike White said that it is a lot easier for Hollywood to talk about race than class. We asked him if the 2 college women in The White Lotus, which revolves around a handful of guests on a Hawaiian resort, were inspired by the 20-somethings starting out as writers in writers' rooms in Hollywood. He said he didn't know. White wrote the White Lotus by himself. So how do you not know? I guess he not. Maybe there's some of the things like I've written some things. The main primary thing that I was talking about before, like I wanted to get to like this studio with the carbon thing. I realized after some time that this was me trying to figure out things in my life. I started realizing, oh, this character is actually an amalgamation of these other characters. Oh, this situation is actually me trying to work out this situation that happened in my life. So some of the things you might not be consciously aware of. But with some of these things, when we're talking about this, like, as I mentioned, people will start moving to different areas. This is part of what I was saying with like the cloud sourcing. You don't have to live in Los Angeles to do some of these things anymore due to the technology that we live in. We're living decades behind the tech, but people were so invested into a system where this is the way things happen. And then you have Rona Chan coming in that takes a pause. So even it being a cultural, societal Rosetta Stone, it's also enabled us to take a pause and reset. Some of the things you're going to reset, like if you're playing video games, you're playing a game, and then you do like a new game plus. A new game plus is when you start the game again with the same tools and probably levels that you've had in the actual game, something like your role-playing games and things like that. When you play it again, chances are you're not going to play it in the exact same way you played it the first time. Maybe you've been invested in building a character with certain strengths and investing in your stat points in certain things. So you go, okay, I'm going to do this. And then later on in the game, you're like, okay, I've invested so much in these stat points. I'm going to keep doing this. I'm going to keep using these weapons. I'm going to keep fighting in this style. I'm going to keep doing this kind of play style. Then you reset to the new game plus. You're like, okay, maybe I'll try something else. Maybe I'll be more general. Maybe I'll go to this other area first instead of this area. And I think that's something you're going to see with people kind of thinking like, now, okay, we were able to do all this work without having to be in Los Angeles. If we already had a more expansive kind of industry, would we have to be in Los Angeles? If we already realized that most of the films that we're doing are not even shot in Los Angeles, why are we living in Los Angeles? Let's move to an area that has more of the actual filming done into it, and then we can commute from that area to that location. So there's all these changes that I think are going to happen. Okay, so back to the last paragraph. But yeah, White said, young girls are kind of a good vehicle to explore that, because it has this sense of treadiness and lingo and hip speak mixed with this idea of who's cool and who's not cool, and has very little to do with, they have very little skin in the game. That's the essence of what I find disturbing about some stuff on the left. Does this have anything to do with making life better for anyone? Or is it just a game? Is it just about making you feel superior? And I think that's something that I've noticed with a lot of these regressive issues. It is about the superiority. It does come from a religious kind of standpoint where it's not really rational. It's not really based on facts. That's why you can't say like, well, you look at someone like Oprah and you say, okay, but Oprah has all this money and all this power. So what's the system that's actually taking? Oh, now Will Smith has actually made this point. When you point out the actual examples of people that are just multimillionaires that are very high achieving, they say that's not enough. You talk about something like BT. There's an entire channel where these people are focusing on making these products. When you talk about like the support someone like a Jussie Smollett had when he came out and he said he was attacked by these MAGA people, these MAGA hat people, look at the support of people coming. If people really hated him, why would they not support him? So when you point out these kind of things, when you point out that, hey, most of the people in Hollywood, despite them might be comparatively struggling to other people within Hollywood, are doing a lot better than 99.99999% of the world, especially 99.999999999% of people who've actually tried to actually make a living in the arts. They'll say, okay, that's not enough. We're still focusing on only the 0.0000000000001% of white people who are on the top, white men at the top. That's who we're comparing to. So there's this kind of ultra focus on that group and not having more of a realistic kind of getting out of that cultishness, that clubbishness that they have. Not cultishness, but yeah, clubbishness of this group where you're like, okay, I'm comparing myself to other people. Like if I am making something, like if I draw something, I don't go and compare myself to just a random person on the street. Like you draw this house. I'm drawing this house, I'm drawing this character, I'm making this small animation. Then I say, okay, you make a small animation, let me see what you do. I don't look at that person and say, okay, my animation is like 1,000 times better than that person. I'll look at somebody who's actually in the animation industry, making a lot of earning a lot of money in animation that has inspired me. And I'll look at that person and say, okay, my stuff is nowhere close to as good as that person's. So I do understand that aspect in getting yourself, raising your ability up, holding your standards up. But saying in general, for me to be like, okay, people who work at Pixar, I should earn as much as somebody who works at Pixar, even though I haven't produced any of the stuff. I mean, if the stuff might be middling quality of that type of thing, but like that person lives in a different location, that person has a different background, so I have to do something in my own ability to get my content to the point where enough people would say, yes, we like what you're doing, Silas, where we're willing to give you this amount of actual money in order for you to keep creating this type of thing. It's up to me to actually show them, not just say, hey, I was born in France, parents were from some tribe in Africa, lived around these different places, so that's it. Do that for things that I had no actual control over. No, I don't like that kind of thing. Okay, so Peter Kiefer and Peter Savodnik are both writers based in Los Angeles. Peter Kiefer's latest story for Los Angeles Magazine was about the ultimate Twitter power broker, and Savodnik's most recent story for Common Sense was about the Havana syndrome. Okay, Twitter type of thing. Now, Twitter is the kind of thing where it's like, I think, where it's being a power broker on Twitter. I don't know if he's talking about behind the scenes, but it's like Pareto principle works on Twitter where like 10% of the actual active users create 80% of the actual activity that goes on in there and things like that. There's many like these accounts that never really tweet anything. And then Havana syndrome, I think, was something about people talking about how some people living in certain locations, there's some theory that there's some kind of sound weapon that's creating these different things happening with people's ailments and things like that. So it's an interesting thing. You can check that out. I like this article. I read this comment before. It was most of these things, if I'm reading something, I'm like, okay, it's either, let me skim the start of the article, then I jump down to see if there's comments. If there's no comments in what you're writing, chances are I'm not going to actually read it. So I had read this before, and I just want to read the open of this. Actually, let me just read the whole thing. This is a long thing anyway. You're here. Thanks for being here. So let's just read this because there's something in here that I wanted to kind of point out and say, okay, what's going on with this and something that I've seen. So this is by Sasha Stone. I have been running the Oscar website awardsdaily.com since 1999. I was one of the leaders pushing for inclusion and diversity starting back in 2001 when Halle Berry became the first black actress and since only black actress to win in that category. It is hard to overstate just how hard it was for actors, writers, and directors to penetrate the white wall. I thought it was my moral duty to change that. But then Trump was elected. Then the community and the left became locked in a kind of mass hysteria. For the most educated in this country, it was a shock that people would vote for Trump existed. To them, it had been about race, because everything on the left was about race. We watched the witch hunt start on Twitter, then go after people who had done things, then go after people who had said things, then go after people who thought things. Now we are in total collapse. I have shifted my own coverage, inspired by Barry Weiss, to push back, to speak out, to teach others not to be afraid of the mob, and to encourage Hollywood to do the same. This industry cannot survive this moment. Art cannot survive outrage culture. It is killing everything in the name of social justice. The Golden Globes being cancelled is one of the most chilling things I have ever lived through. None of my colleagues would even acknowledge the winners, which trickled out on social media without an audience, without a show. I myself have been chased around Twitter, called a white supremacist, and had my business threatened. I have a little Netflix show right now that people have tried to get me fired from, all because I speak my mind. It is like the Red Scare, which morphed into the Blacklist, which morphed into the McCarthy trials. Eventually, it took Eisenhower to stop this madness. The fear is palpable everywhere you look, and visible in every single one of their films, because the ones that push back on the fear don't even get their foot in the door. I think that's the word missing there. Those who control the Democratic Party have the same problem as Hollywood right now. They don't realize that they have become an insulated, isolated aristocracy that uses race and social justice as a way to absolve themselves of the crime of success and privilege, like the Catholics before the Reformation, and in so doing is forced to label more than half the country that doesn't support them racist. I keep telling people that this, like all episodes of mass hysteria, will end. Make sure when that happens that you'll be on the right side when the worst of it came down. History will not be kind. So with this, I think it's a pretty decent comment. It's the most liked, I think. I think that's the status that I have here. So yeah, that's most replied as well. So 360 likes, 212 replies. I think that's the default thing, and lots of people have interacted with this. But what I see here is, what is she saying? Was it actually a thing? It's a diversity starting back. She says it's hard to overstate just how hard it was for actors, writers, and directors to penetrate the white wall. I would like to see, because I would like to ask her, if I haven't had some time, just ask her something about this comment. I'm not going to sign in and subscribe to actually ask. Maybe I won't. But to have something like this, to ask, what was she seeing back then? When the activities that she was doing back then, why does she think that is not part of this? Because in my estimation, the things that she was doing back then were just the start of this. Yes, you might have started something that was good, and then some grifters came on, but no. The activities she began back then, behind the scenes, pushing for inclusion and diversity. Why were you pushing for inclusion and diversity? If there was a demand for that already, why not start separate locations? What is it about the industry that is so limited that you can't have inclusion and diversity on a competing kind of platform? What was so limiting about that system, in my estimation, that's in there? Were they same kind of structures back then that they're saying are the same ones here? Maybe that's what they're talking about here. The same structures that existed in the past that kept certain people out are now the same structures that exist now that keep a different kind of certain people out. But it's still that same kind of thing. So what is it about that system that does that? And I think the result of it isn't going and reestablishing the Hollywood system, because I think the Hollywood system inherently has those blocks. It is starting alternative systems. It's going to come from somewhere else. Once an organism can no longer actually evolve, can no longer actually match the environment, other organisms are also going to come. Other organisms will be able to dish and eat on it. Like it's like dinosaur dies and dinosaur grows to a certain size, and it's just like it dies off. Then other smaller organisms will come and feed off of that dinosaur's body in and of itself, and it'll also be able to feed off of the areas that dinosaur used to use to nourish itself. So I think that's kind of what you're going to see happening right now. And I think a good point here, I've talked about this, where we talk about echo chambers, where it's like some people are in echo chamber where they just hear certain things, they self-select with certain information, certain people, certain communities. So, oh, I don't know anyone who's racist because you are not a racist person. So if you're not a racist person, chances are you're not going to be associating with other racist people. People who aren't racist will be friends with you and things like that, and you'll deal with situations and spaces. You will inherently avoid racist spaces. So maybe when you say that, you're in that kind of bubble. But maybe some of these people who are talking about how many racist people there are, for some reason they're around racist people. Maybe they themselves might have racist friends that they deal with, so they project that on other people. Someone who's like, yeah, I have no real problem with transgender people, but I also don't really know any transgender people because it's like a million, 5 to 5 million tops. Like the ones who've actually gone through surgery, I think it's less than a million in the United States of America. It's most definitely less than a million in the United States of America that have actually gone through actual surgery, that actually display as other people. People who have some of these issues actually exist. The actual population of homosexual people also very low. But if you have majority of the homosexual population in the United States of America moving to a few big metropolitan areas where a lot of the people who are involved in creating some of these Hollywood stories live in those areas. Like if you live in New York City, some areas in New York City, it's like 25% of the people there are gay. But then you go to like majority of the country, they've gotten all those people, and the people who were in those areas moved from those smaller areas to those bigger areas. So it might seem like, oh yeah, I know a gay person, I know a lesbian person, I know a transgender person. Most people in the United States of America don't know all those people. If you're black, you know mostly black people. You don't know a black this, a black that, a white this, an Asian this, and that's how it is for most people, I think. But then now you talk about percentages of the population that are living in cities and living in urban areas. So then these kind of things where I think some people are projecting some of their lived experiences and some of their issues onto the rest of the world. It's not necessarily working in that kind of sense. But that's been this article. Thank you all very much for coming along on this long journey and listening to this stuff. I have a lot more other content. Most of my stuff is now mostly going towards conversations and things like this, but I'll be doing more of these. I have a few other things saved up where it's like, okay, I wanted to read this article and I might as well actually read this. I have a few different things on my blog. I do have a Substack blog. I don't really update the Substack as much as the rantathon.wordpress.com blog, where I have like a perspective mattress type of things. That's probably will be reading a few of those in here. Have a few different conversation series coming up. As I mentioned, I'm working on something on the side with my friends to be doing more things in actual production, animation, gaming, storytelling, and things like that kind of space. But let me know what you think about this article, because I think this is something that is predictable to me. If you've been even passing attention to the industry, to several industries, I think this kind of thing of the woke things coming in and it being more about this other central ideology versus the primary purpose of the industry that has been involved with a group or the community that has been involved with this thing, then you just see this you see this mutation that doesn't really apply to the ongoing existence of that social organism that has now been infected or changed by this wokeness. Just a thought I had while editing this. Think about in the end here. They were talking about how the Jews left literally Hitler. And then now you have a situation where people who literally mean figuratively reacted to Trump like, oh, Trump is literally Hitler. Like, oh my God, we can't do this. We have to act in a certain way. We have to message in a certain way. So just go back to the past, decades ago, when those Jews left literally Hitler, the literal actual Hitler, literal Nazi Germany, they left that and came to the United States of America. What did they have? What access to resources did they have? What knowledge did they have? What access to the market did they have? What access to technology to actually make these things did they have? What ability did they have, yet they created Hollywood? So thank you all for listening, and just to finish this up, to close this out, to condense or reiterate, summarize some of the observations that I've had about this article and other things, just observing this in general. We can look at people and say, oh, you want just pro-women this, buy-women this, why don't you go out and create your own industry, fund your own industry, because there's things already being done that way instead of demanding Hollywood do it. Oh, you're tired of hearing about King John II and about the Scots and the Bravehearts and things like this. You want more of African history content because you have some background in that and you feel you're underrepresented. Why don't you just go to actual online and find actual African content, or actually go out there and start funding some of those things because there's people already doing those things. when you create that actual thing and show that it's actually there, reward people for that. Or you want something because you figure, oh, we're an Asian minority and we're always just kung fu people, or we're all this spiritual type of man, or all this geisha type of thing. I want different depictions of it. There's entire industries in Asia you can have access to, or you can create your own things in yourself. But one thing you have to realize is a lot of these people are not that creative. If they were creative, they wouldn't be focus so much on things that happenstance. Oh, I just happen to be black, so I'm going to happen to be able to have a better idea of how to write these things. Oh, what's about this character? What's this? Oh, they're Asian. They're just an Asian. It's an Asian person in a position of leadership. That's it. What about the actual characteristics of this person? What are the challenges? No, no, they're Asian. That's it. Okay, so what about the training? What's the challenges that this character actually goes through? What makes this character someone that we're going to look up to and say, yeah, I want to be like this character. I want to understand. No, no, they're a woman. Why would you not want to be with a woman? Why would you not be interested in watching the character as a woman? There's a lack of creativity there. So the people who actually are creative, the people who have been involved in getting more pleasure out of it, it's not just a job, but it's something that they're doing where this is a creative industry. There's something extra in there. I think it's more on y'all to be the ones to go out there and create something new. That's something that I'm involved into doing. That's something that I have my mind towards doing, going to more like creating my own stories with my own friends that I think are telling different stories in different ways and things like that, but with that same goal of entertaining and informing people, not based off of just things like the happenstances. So I think that's something that I think y'all should focus on and something that y'all can achieve. There are going to be some changes. This is a time of change. I think time in general is the measurement of change, and things will change. Yes, you're going to have things like the Golden Globes. How many people were actually watching the Golden Globes even before? It's always been more of an industry thing. So I understand from people within the industry might look at that, oh, they're not covering this. But those awards were still given. There's people in other trades and other fields that are rather entertaining to people, or that are useful to people in their day-to-day lives, that are in the actual entertainment industry, that have their award shows that we don't know about, that people in the entertainment industry don't watch. And most of the entertainment industry is just regular people doing regular jobs. This level of prestige that has been given to certain aspects of it, I think, is unnecessary. It's undue. It's unmerited in many cases. I get that it's a credential. If you are in an award-winning production, it's something you can put in your resume to get more work or to get different higher pay for different situations. But this is something common across all fields. So those awards can still be given. It doesn't have to be on this big pomp and glamour type of thing with the top 1% of the industry being lauded as such grand figures. So I think as the industry restarts up, the entertainment industry, there'll be less of a focus on just Hollywood. Just the same way Hollywood is not necessarily focusing just on the US market, the consumers in the US and the rest of the world are also not just going to be hyper-focused on Hollywood as the primary source of creation, of creativity and things like this. And that to me is a positive thing. So guys, gals, and everything else in between, thank y'all for listening to this. I have heard from other people who share the same view that there's a lot of hope. There's a lot of other venues, other places, other locations you can create these things. It's a good time for creativity. Links below to different things that I'm doing. You can also follow this wherever you listen to this. There'll be a lot more content coming, a lot more information coming. Thank y'all. Till next time. Goodbye.